We are currently standing in historic Palmyra, Virginia, in Fluvanna County. Before we begin, allow me to give a brief introduction of the region as a whole, the geography of the area, as well as two important individuals who helped shape this region. So first, Fluvanna County is in central or north central Virginia. Palmyra is directly in the middle of Fluvanna County. There are two main rivers which acted as the lifeblood of this county for centuries. That's the Rivanna River, which cuts from the northwest to the southeast, and then you have the James River, which curls around the southern part of the county. Fluvanna became a county in 1777. However, most of the historic sites we're going to talk about today have to do, or come about really, a half century later, in the early 1830s, and then a little later than that as well, as we get to talk about Civil War Park. Now, there are going to be two individuals who were very important, even vital, to the development of Palmyra and Fluvanna. Reverend Walker Timberlake and John Hartwell Coke. Both men have important family members dating back to the very beginnings of Fluvanna County. Coke had family members who were integral in the settlement of Fluvanna County, while John Timberlake, a relative of Walker Timberlake, was the first county clerk of Fluvanna. Walker Timberlake was a Methodist preacher, as well as a very smart businessman. He and his family ended up owning most of Palmyra for about 40 years. What they would do is they would lease out property and businesses and even land to families who wanted to live here or business owners who wanted to own businesses in Palmyra. He would end up granting 4 acres of land for public use, which we're standing on now. The other person of interest was John Hartwell Coke. He was a Southern-born gentleman, born in an aristocratic family in Virginia. He was given a broad swath of land in Virginia. Both men were Southern progressives. They were known for their anti-slavery movement as well as their temperance movement. And both men were involved in the founding of very important Virginia colleges. Coke in the founding of UVA with Jefferson, and Timberlake with Randolph-Macon College. With all that said, let's get down to some of these historical sites. Our first site is actually going to be Palmyra Mills. It's the site on which Palmyra is named after. Actually, the very first reference to Palmyra that we know of is from our 1820s map, in which it references Palmyra Mills. That's about a 2-minute walk down this way, so we're going to head down there now. What you're looking at right now is all that remains of Palmyra Mills. The town of Palmyra actually developed around the mill. It was built in 1813, 1814, and was actually named after King Solomon's trading post, Tamdar, which is in current-day Syria. This mill, like many other mills along the Rivanna River, did not have that iconic mill wheel we all think of when we think of a mill along a river. This was a merchant mill. They would buy the grain, they would still ground it down, and then ship it down the Rivanna River. According to count books that we have found from Palmyra Mills, they ground wheat, corn, and even would buy chunks of limestone and ground that down to sell plaster. By the 1840s, Palmyra Mills was shipping over 500 barrels of flour and over 44,000 pounds of plaster a year. Even though this is all that survives, in its heyday, it would have been over 5 stories tall. However, during the Civil War, it was burned by Union troops. Then it was rebuilt again, but in the 1930s Depression, they took down the upper stories and used it for other buildings in the town. Now, we're going to talk about the next part, which is the covered bridge of Palmyra. In January of 1824, Walker Timberlake was given permission to build a bridge over the Rivanna River. Where we are standing now is where the new bridge, the steel truss bridge, is, as you can see here. The Palmyra covered bridge would have been a little further upriver. Now, Timberlake was able to collect tolls until the county purchased the bridge in 1847. And when the county purchased it, all tolls were rescinded. The covered bridge was a focal point for Fluvanna. A newspaper man actually commented on it, which I'll get to a little bit later. The bridge was also included in a 1952 Centennial of Engineering stamp with the George Washington Bridge. It's one of its claims to fame. Just like the mill, the Civil War took its toll on the bridge. It was burned by Union troops, but then over time it was built again, and then destroyed, and then rebuilt and destroyed, until finally, in 1931, a steel truss bridge, the bridge we are standing over now, was built. It was burned by the Virginia Department of Transportation because it was deemed a flood hazard. This is the last part of the tour downriver. We're actually going to head back up to where we started now, near historic Palmyra. The next three sites we'll be looking at were all built on the public land that Timberlake gave the county. We'll be looking at the Old Stone Jail, the historic county courthouse, and finally ending with Civil War Park. The very first building built on the public land given by Timberlake was the jail. It was built in 1828, and our friend who we talked about earlier, John Hartwell Koch, is the one who designed the building. This is actually the first official county building in all of Fluvanna. The stones you see here were from a quarry in nearby Bremo. That's where John Hartwell Koch actually lived. It operated as a jail until the 1950s. Then, in 1963, it came under the care of the Fluvanna Historical Society. And to this day, it acts as a museum and headquarters for the Fluvanna Society. Unfortunately, we are unable to go inside due to COVID-19 and restrictions due to that. On the very same plot of land we were just discussing that was given by Timberlake, John H. Koch, along with Timberlake, designed the courthouse you see behind you. It was completed in 1830, just 2 years after the Old Stone Jail. I told you these two guys were important. Its architectural style is in the Greek Revival, and it is the earliest Greek Revival styled courthouse in all of Virginia. Because of its architectural style, its nickname is the Acropolis of Palmyra. As one approaches the courthouse, you can imagine just how daunting it may seem, passing the Old Stone Jail, making your way up a hill to the highest point in town, the courthouse. And as you entered, the words inscribed on stone above the entrance would read, "The maxim held sacred by every free people, obey the law." In 1835, just 20 years after the erection of Palmyra Mills, 7 years after the jail and the covered bridge were built, and 5 years after the historic courthouse was built, a newspaper man came to Palmyra, Virginia. He reported on the town, giving a list of the population, number of horses, slaves, along with the counting of the buildings here. 1 Methodist church, 1 merchant, a grist and sawmill, 1 woolen factory, 1 tanner, 2 saddlers, 2 tailors, 1 boot and shoe factory, 1 cabinet maker, a number of carpenters and coopers. He ends by noting the recently erected, quote, handsome and permanent bridge, end quote, and stated that, quote, the village is thriving, end quote. This is the last stop on our tour today. This small park was dedicated as a memorial to Confederate soldiers of Fluvanna County. It was donated, the land was donated by the Daughters of the Confederacy in 1901, with the pair of Napoleon cannons coming 8 years later in 1909. Now, there was good cause for Fluvanna to want to memorialize their soldiers. Over 11 companies were formed in Fluvanna County during the Civil War, totaling 1,026 men. This is pretty amazing, considering their white male population of 1860 was 5,349. The centerpiece is an 18-foot tall obelisk with a marble cannonball on top. There are numerous inscriptions on and around the obelisk. This first one is to the memory of the Confederate soldiers of Fluvanna County, 1861 to 1865. On the opposite side of the previous inscription, we see 2 crossed battle flags with the dates 1861 on top and 1865 on the bottom. This one, just below the obelisk, says Fluvanna Artillery, Nelson's Battalion, Army of Northern Virginia, 1861 to 1865. C.G. Sneed, Captain. So this plaque here on my right is dedicated to Major D.W. Anderson, Company K, 44th Virginia Infantry Division, 1861 to 1865. And this one on my left is from the Patriotic Women of Fluvanna County, 1861 to 1865. Both men mentioned in the plaques I showed you, Anderson and Sneed, were here in the dedication in 1901. They were either marching in the parade to the unveiling or doing crowd control to get the crowd to listen to what the speakers had to say. Civil War Park was not always named that. Its original name was Confederate Park, and it has not been without its controversy. Following the church massacre in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015, the County Board of Supervisors wanted to change the name of the park. And so just a few months later, by September, the board was given approval to change the name to Civil War Park. Just a few years later, they wanted to make one more change. In 2019, this monument, marking the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, was added. It represents the realized freedom of over 5,000 slaves who were here in Fluvanna when the Emancipation Proclamation was given. I just want to give my thanks and appreciation to the Fluvanna Historical Society for providing me with much of the material and some of the information that led me to these sites. Even though their archives were not open and museums were not allowed to go inside, the information they provided me were very encouraging and detailed and allowed me to gain insights into some of the more unknown aspects of these sites. I hope you enjoyed this walking tour.